Pause for just a moment and stay present with me, because what you are about to hear is not the kind of thing that passes through your mind and disappears. This is for the person carrying something they cannot quite put into words, for the person who keeps returning to someone in their thoughts long after common sense says they should have moved forward, yet the feeling remains, quiet and persistent, like something still burning underneath the surface, even when the flame is not visible. And here is what makes it strange. It does not always arrive with intensity. It does not always announce itself dramatically. Sometimes it is nothing more than a thought that surfaces without warning, a shift somewhere in your chest, a sense that someone remains connected to you even across silence, even across distance, even when nothing is being said between you. There is a reason that feeling keeps returning. Someone holds something powerful for you, something they may not be fully willing to name even inside their own mind. But the bond itself feels restrained somehow, like it is moving against resistance. And that tension changes everything, because when a connection carries the feeling of the impossible, it does not always weaken. It often intensifies inside the two people living it. So stay with this, because what lies beneath the distance, the mixed signals, and the strange persistence of this connection is far more layered than it first appears. And if any of this feels like it is speaking directly to your situation, that is not a coincidence. There is someone in your world who does not feel ordinary things about you. Not lightly, not casually, not in a way that arrives on a Tuesday and dissolves by Thursday. What they feel goes deeper than that. It moves quietly and constantly, with more weight than they are comfortable carrying or admitting. In the beginning, you may have been simply another person in the landscape of their life. Then you became someone worth noticing. Then someone they respected. Then someone they trusted without entirely meaning to. And somewhere in that progression, before they had time to catch themselves, you became someone they cannot stop returning to in their mind. That trajectory is what makes this so complicated. The connection did not form out of convenience or boredom. It formed from recognition, from something in you that reached something in them. And that is precisely why the energy between you feels so charged even now. What stands between you and the movement you might expect from that kind of feeling is not an absence of emotion. It is circumstance, it is timing, it is responsibility, it is fear, personal history, existing commitments, social expectations, and the kind of weight that makes a person hesitate even when their heart is pointing clearly in one direction. So if the energy between you has felt undeniably strong while the actual movement has felt almost paralyzed, this is why. It is not always because someone cares too little. Sometimes it is because they care in a way that frightens them, because one genuine step forward would shift more in their life than they currently feel prepared to shift. What you need to understand first is that this person is not in conflict with you. They are in conflict with themselves. Every morning, they wake up with you already somewhere in their awareness, and almost immediately they begin working against that awareness. They turn over small moments from your time together. They hear echoes of things you said. They remember the particular feeling of being truly seen by you. And then they pull back from all of it, because wanting you feels like a threat to the structure they have built around themselves. For some, that structure involves existing emotional commitments. For others, it is built from family expectations, cultural pressure, personal values, or a version of their life they agreed to follow before they understood what they were agreeing to. The deeper issue is often not that they do not want the connection. It is that the connection holds up a mirror to parts of their life that no longer feel honest. And that is an uncomfortable thing to look at. So they stay quiet. They hold everything in. They observe instead of speaking. They retreat when their instinct is to reach. And silence, from the outside, can be deeply misleading. It can look like calm. It can look like indifference. It can look like someone who has simply moved on. But silence is very often not emptiness. It is overflow. It is what happens when a person is carrying more than they can safely express and has no adequate container for any of it. If they appear controlled, do not take that as evidence that the interior is empty. What appears as stillness on the surface is frequently covering something far more turbulent underneath. This is where the tension begins compounding. Because the more someone works to suppress what they feel, the more that feeling tends to consolidate rather than dissolve. Restrained emotion does not always fade quietly over time. Sometimes it condenses. It becomes more concentrated precisely because it has no outlet. Every moment they stop themselves from reaching out, the bond does not weaken. It sinks deeper. Every time they choose restraint over honesty, the internal pressure increases. Every time they perform indifference, the truth underneath pushes back harder. This is why you may have experienced strange waves with this person. Moments where they felt emotionally close, even with nothing being said. Moments where they seemed distant and yet somehow still present in a way that was hard to define. Moments when you found yourself thinking about them without any clear trigger. That sensation of something unresolved between you is not imaginary. It is accurate. What has not been spoken or fully faced tends to keep moving beneath the surface. It shapes moods and timing. It creates that recurring feeling that something is still in motion even when everything appears still. And on their end, this is genuinely exhausting. They may appear steady and composed to the world, even reliable and focused, but inside there is a continuous negotiation between what they feel and what they believe they are allowed to feel, between what is true and what is safe, between honesty and consequence. If this connection has ever felt heavy to carry, it is because it is carrying weight beyond simple attraction. It carries pressure. It carries the possibility of real change. And change is exactly what they are working hard not to face. This is also why time and distance have not brought the relief you anticipated. If this connection had been shallow, it would have dissolved naturally by now. If it had only been about chemistry or the novelty of newness, it would have burned through its fuel and gone quiet. But it has not. It keeps returning in one form or another because it is not being sustained by habit or routine. It is being sustained by something emotionally true. Something in both of you shifted when this connection began. You may have experienced it as familiarity, as ease, as a kind of understanding that did not need full sentences to function, something that registered in the body before the mind could analyze it. They felt the same thing. That is why this does not behave like ordinary attraction. It does not fade because logic says it should. It does not weaken simply because it is inconvenient. It keeps returning because something beneath it remains unfinished. What many people miss is this: the longing itself is not the whole story. Beneath the longing is something even more significant. You awakened something in them that had been quietly dormant. They reflected something in you that was waiting to be recognized. So yes, the desire matters, but deeper than the desire is an awakening, a truth that keeps pressing upward toward the surface. That is why dismissing this bond is so difficult for either of you. They may move through their days looking entirely normal, showing up at work, being present with the people who depend on them, doing what the shape of their life requires. But the mind circles back. The heart returns to what made it feel alive. They remember how uncomplicated things felt in your presence, how understood they felt without having to translate themselves. They remember small moments that should not have carried much significance, but somehow did. And that is exactly what unsettles them. Because once someone has been genuinely seen at that level, they cannot fully go back to accepting shallower versions of connection and pretending that is sufficient. This is the private cost of choosing to hold back. What gets suppressed does not disappear. It surfaces differently, as restlessness, as a vague emotional distance from people and places that used to feel familiar, as quiet dissatisfaction with choices that once seemed stable, as questions that were not present before. Why does something feel tight? Why does a life that looked right from the outside no longer feel right from the inside? Why does a kind of emptiness keep showing up in spaces that used to feel full? And whether they say your name directly or not, you become part of those questions. You become a silent comparison between the life they are living and the truth they have felt. If you ever wondered whether this bond changed them in some way, the answer is yes. Quietly, perhaps invisibly, but genuinely. It changed what they can comfortably accept. It changed what they can honestly ignore. It changed what feels real to them. And shifts of that kind rarely fully reverse. You are changing too. That is the second layer of what this experience is doing. This connection has not only been pulling something out of them, it has been waking something in you as well. Since this person entered your life, you may have noticed that your tolerance for certain things has quietly dropped. What once passed as enough now feels thin. What once looked like real connection now looks more like surface contact. What once seemed like affection now feels like a pale version of it. You are becoming more sensitive to what genuine depth actually feels like, and once that sensitivity develops, settling becomes much harder to do. That is part of why releasing this has felt complicated. It is not only about the person, it is about what the connection pointed you toward. It showed you what your heart is capable of feeling. It showed you the difference between being given attention and being truly recognized. It clarified what actually nourishes you at an emotional level. Not every powerful connection arrives to become a relationship immediately. Some arrive first to do something more interior. They sharpen your awareness. They raise your standard. They make you less willing to negotiate away the things that genuinely matter to you just to hold on to someone. So if you have been caught between longing and growth, understand this. The purpose of this connection is not to put your life on hold. It is to make your life more honest, more self-aware, more aligned with what you actually need rather than what you have been willing to accept. There is a reason this bond feels both sacred and unsettling at the same time, because it does not only carry desire, it carries truth. And truth is threatening to anyone who has spent years constructing a life around roles, obligations, and the version of themselves that other people recognize. You did not create the instability in their world. You simply made visible what was already beginning to crack. Your presence illuminated what was already uncertain. That is why the push and pull continues. That is why warmth can be followed so quickly by retreat. It is not because they do not know what they feel. It is because knowing creates its own pressure. The pressure to make a choice. The pressure to be honest. The pressure to allow their life to change shape. Many people are simply not prepared for that the moment clarity arrives. So they rationalize. They call it a phase. They try to wait it out or intellectualize it away. But deep connections do not tend to dissolve through neglect. They convert into internal pressure. They become the thing a person keeps quietly meeting in their most honest moments, in the stillness before sleep, in the hollow space between the life that looks fine and the feeling that something is missing. If this is familiar, then pay close attention here, because this is where your own role becomes critical. Your purpose in this is not to absorb their fear and carry it as your own. It is not to spend your energy decoding every silence until it finally yields certainty. It is to remain honest with yourself while the truth moves through both of your lives in whatever form it takes. That is where your own power begins to come back to you. Because the most quietly damaging thing about a connection like this is not the longing itself. It is how the longing can begin to quietly displace you from your own center. It can turn you into someone who watches for signals instead of living. Someone who keeps space perpetually open for potential, while reality keeps handing you uncertainty. But something in you is already shifting. You are beginning to understand that feeling deeply does not obligate you to wait indefinitely. You are beginning to see that genuine love does not demand that you erase yourself in order to maintain it. You are learning that intensity is not the same thing as readiness, and that mystery is not the same thing as compatibility. You can care about this person and still remain rooted in yourself. You can acknowledge the bond and still refuse to build your entire emotional future around someone else's unresolved conflict. You can hold compassion without holding yourself permanently available to half-presence and ambiguity. That is not coldness. That is honesty. That is what this experience is slowly making possible in you. When you begin to hold the connection from that place, something changes. The bond may still carry meaning, but it stops operating as something that controls you from the inside. It becomes something you can understand and hold clearly rather than something that consumes your entire inner landscape. And from that place, you no longer have to chase answers. Truth reveals itself through behavior over time, through consistency, through choices made in real life rather than in carefully managed silence. If this connection is ever going to become something real and mutual in the actual world, it will require more than the feeling alone, more than chemistry, more than that particular ease that exists between you. It will require courage, the kind that leads someone to speak plainly rather than hide behind the complexity of their circumstances, the kind that aligns what a person does with what they actually feel. Without that, even the deepest and most genuine connection remains suspended. Meaningful, yes. Real in some essential sense, yes. But incomplete. And perhaps that used to feel like loss to you. But now something else is becoming visible. Meaning does not require a specific outcome to be real. Some connections become a shared future. Some become a turning point. Some become the bridge between an older version of yourself and the one that is now emerging. None of those paths makes the bond less significant. They simply clarify what role it was meant to play. If this person reaches a place where they are genuinely ready, you will not need to interpret it through signals or guess based on energy. Readiness that is real does not communicate itself through riddles. It moves with clarity. It shows up directly. It acts with consistency across time. If that does not come, that is its own kind of answer. Silence sustained over time is still a response. Repeated inaction is still a form of choice. Continued delay is still something being chosen, and your life cannot remain organized around waiting for someone else's readiness to arrive. Looking forward, connections like this tend to move in one of two directions. Either a person arrives at the edge of their own truth and finds they can no longer keep living divided, or they retreat further into what feels manageable and familiar. Some people choose honesty over comfort. Some choose genuine growth over the appearance of stability. Some reach a point where they realize that continuing to suppress what they feel is costing more than facing it honestly ever would. But others turn back. They settle deeper into routine. They choose the image of a life over the truth of one. They reframe emotional numbness as contentment because real change asks too much. Both responses reveal something essential, and they reveal it through behavior, not through words, not through energy or symbolism or promising moments, through actual choices made visibly over time. That is where your answers live, not in reading signs, not in waiting for the right feeling to descend, in behavior, in action, in what someone consistently does with the truth they are carrying. So stay anchored in yourself, not closed off, not cold, just anchored. You do not need to rescue someone from their own fear. You do not need to sit in emotional suspension indefinitely while another person slowly decides whether honesty is worth the risk. You do not need to carry a bond alone and call that love. What you need is balance, the kind that lets you remain open without losing yourself, warm without erasing yourself, hopeful without surrendering your judgment. This connection entered your life to refine something in you, not to trap you inside it, to raise the standard by which you understand what love actually requires. And what love actually requires is not secret intensity. It is not private recognition between two people who never quite find the courage to stand in the same light together. Real love requires presence, participation, mutual honesty, courage from both directions. Without those things, even extraordinary feeling remains incomplete. So the connection begins to look different from here. It may still matter. It may still carry genuine significance, but it no longer asks you to disappear inside it. Some bonds arrive in life not to be held permanently, but to awaken. They arrive with force. They disturb old patterns. They reveal what was hidden. They illuminate hunger that had been quietly managed into silence. And then they ask something. Are you going to return to sleep, or are you going to live more honestly because of what you felt here? That is the real question at the center of all of this. Not whether someone secretly holds you in their thoughts, not whether timing will ever align in the way you hoped, whether you can remember your own worth while standing fully inside an experience as powerful as this one. Look at what you are actually learning. You are learning to feel deeply without losing your footing in reality. You are learning to trust what you sense without abandoning what you know. You are learning that a connection can be genuinely meaningful and still not be sufficient unless it becomes mutual, grounded, and lived openly. That understanding will serve you for the rest of your life. It will stop you from accepting fragments and calling them enough. It will stop you from confusing emotional tension with emotional availability. It will stop you from making yourself smaller just because a connection feels rare. That is real growth. The quiet kind. The durable kind. The kind that permanently changes the way you love, the way you choose, the way you recognize what is genuinely meant for you when it finally appears in full. And yes, there remains a possibility. One day this person may arrive at the outer limit of their own divided life and discover they can no longer maintain the distance between what they feel and how they are living. That moment, if it comes, will not arrive loudly. It will arrive with clarity, without the performance or the drama. They will simply find that staying where they are has become more costly than the honesty they have been avoiding. They may finally see that truth does not become less true simply because acknowledging it is inconvenient. If that day comes, you will recognize it not because the energy is intense, but because it is clean. There will be less uncertainty and more directness, less symbolism and more actual presence, less tension and more grounded, consistent truth. But until that happens, if it happens at all, your direction remains the same. Keep living, keep developing, keep becoming someone who understands the difference between hidden feeling and lived love. Someone who stays open to what is genuinely real rather than only to what remains possible. Someone who knows that love is supposed to expand life, not reduce it to waiting. That is the quiet strength you are stepping into right now. And if this is reaching you at exactly the right moment, some part of you has already been ready to receive it. So keep going. Stay honest with yourself. Let actions show you what words never reliably could. And hold on to this as firmly as you can. What is genuinely meant for you will never ask you to betray yourself in order to receive it. In the end, this was never only a story about another person's concealed feelings. It was always also about what happened to you through the experience, about how this connection forced a new kind of clarity in you, about what you can no longer comfortably ignore, what you now understand you genuinely need, and how much of yourself you are no longer willing to surrender in the name of love. That is the real thing this brought you. You are not the same person who entered this bond. You see more honestly now. You understand that depth without mutual honesty eventually becomes its own kind of suffering. You understand that being recognized by someone is not complete if it never moves into action. You understand that longing is not evidence of destiny, and that silence is not always something worth romanticizing. Sometimes silence is only fear that has learned how to appear meaningful. You are no longer here to romanticize fear. You are here for truth, for connection that can exist openly, not only in private thoughts, for something mutual and honest that can stand in the light of actual life. So whether this person ever finds the courage to step toward what they feel, or whether they remain simply a chapter that permanently altered something in you, you are already moving towards something more solid. You are becoming someone who can hold depth without losing themselves inside it, someone who can love without dissolving, someone who can release what refuses to become clear and still remain genuinely open to what is real. That is not loss, that is becoming more fully yourself. That is what this was always here to wake up in you. So if you needed the clearest possible answer, here it is. You do not need to pursue what is not yet able to stand beside you in the open. You only need to keep becoming the version of yourself who recognizes real love when it arrives, who can receive it without retreating into fear, and who will never again mistake unresolved tension for something that was meant to be.